So first up is Dr. Erin Pritchard with the social and spatial experiences of dwarfs in public spaces. Erin completed her PhD at Newcastle University in 2014. So over to you, Erin.
Thank you.
Do you want me to do the slides or you can click out?
Hopefully this works. Okay, thank you. Hi, so I'm going to be talking about the social and spatial experiences of people with dwarfism. So how this project came about was based on my own positionality of someone with dwarfism and growing up with these experiences that I wanted to know if other people had similar ones. And so, first of all, I just want to explain why I've used the term people with dwarfism or dwarfs, and that is simply because it's more relatable to the impairment. So if you say short-statured or restricted growth, it can just mean you're small. If it's a little person, you can mean you're a child, and that's why, infantilizing to adults who are just short, especially when they get treated like children. And the reason for the word midget that I'm not using is because it's a very offensive term that not many people are aware of. Okay, so my research background, as Claire says, I completed my doctorate at Newcastle University in 2014. It was in the Department of Geography, Politics and Sociology under the supervision of Professor Janice McLaughlin and Professor Peter Hopkins. And it was based in human geography, but in the subfield of social geographies and in the subdisciplines of geographies of disabilities and geographies of body size. So it really gives a spatial awareness to the project, so to understand how people navigate through the built environment. So it builds a lot on urban understandings that are influenced in geography. So the aims and objectives were to explore how people navigate, people with dwarfism navigate through the built environment, and this is due to both social and spatial barriers. To understand the social experiences of dwarfs or people with dwarfism, and to understand how cultural representations of dwarfism can affect social attitudes and subsequently affect how people with dwarfism experience spaces. So I wanted to unpack the spatial barriers people with dwarfism encounter and to understand how they deal with these barriers, maybe through resistance, such as avoidance, or through doing things in their own way, and in some ways through dependency. The second objective was to explore the social experiences and again how they manage unwanted social interactions such as name calling and intrusive questioning. And to gain a deeper understanding of the social experiences, I explored the cultural representations and how they impact upon the lives of people with dwarfism. So the questions were, due to unaccommodating infrastructure, how do people with dwarfism negotiate spaces and facilities within the built environment? What social responses do people with dwarfism experience when dealing with spatial barriers? To look at whether disabled accessible spaces help or hinder people with dwarfism. And do the participants feel that cultural reps of dwarfism affect society's treatment towards them? And do participants avoid certain spaces in the built environment due to both social and spatial barriers? So just to inform you, dwarfism is an impairment that results in someone being no taller than 4'10". The average stature of someone with dwarfism is 4 foot, and there are about 400 different types of dwarfism. At the time of writing this, there was only about 200 different types, but a lot of those were undiagnosed. The most common form of dwarfism is achondroplasia, and that's disproportionate dwarfism. So it's someone like me, I have an average sized torso but short limbs, where someone with proportionate dwarfism is just short in stature. But like with disproportionate dwarfism, they can have underlying medical conditions or impairments such as spinal stenosis, which can cause mobility difficulties. There's approximately 250,000 people with achondroplasia living worldwide. The cause is genetic, and about 80% of people with dwarfism, such as myself, are born to average-sized parents. So I use qualitative research, a mixture of semi-structured interviews that incorporated photo-elicitation exercises. So they were a mixture of face-to-face, telephone interviews, and one email interview. The reason why I used telephone interviews was logistical purposes, because my participants were scattered all across the UK. So one day I was travelling down to, somewhere like Kent, and the next day I had to be in Scotland, and it was just not feasible. So to save on time and money, I used some phone interviews, and some participants preferred that because some of them kept letting me down quite often. I thought, I'm not travelling to London for no reason. Well, there's always something to do there, but I'm not. Okay. And then the photo elicitation, they were to gather richer data, provoke memories. And it was for data triangulation. It really tried to produce more valid data, especially because with dwarfism, the recruitment wasn't going to be great. So I sort of anticipated that. And ethical approval was granted by Newcastle University and followed the ESRC guidelines. Okay. So my positionality, the research is influenced by having dwarfism, and this really helped to shape the data. So for a lot of people with dwarfism, they're a cultural fascination. It's not difficult. I've been on groups with people with dwarfism on Facebook, and there's always some strange person from a chat magazine or Women's Weekly or something trying to get you to be interviewed, or trying to get you to be part of a documentary because they want to see a real life dwarf. I felt with my positionality, by saying, look, I'm an academic with dwarfism, where are some of your experiences? I want to build on them. I want to send you the key findings. I don't want to just come and see the real life dwarf. And so that's why I was doing that. And you get a sense of what they're on about more. Now that can be a con, because then being a new researcher, participants would just say to me, oh, you know what I mean? And at the point, I did know what they meant. But then I'd go home, transcribe and go, oh, I'm not sure what they meant. So it was trying to work out those pros and cons. So the participants, there was about 22 people overall, and as you can see, 20 of those were female. This wasn't intentional, but as Shakespeare et al. Points out, women with dwarfism are more likely to take part in the research. That's what they found out in their own research. I found that, but I also did this because when I was recruiting, I had a bit of trouble with some of the male participants, which I'll come on to. And so I just went and interviewed females. Because it was UK based, most were British, but there was some international perspectives which were really useful. All were 18 and over, and one of the interesting things was to look at people with different types of dwarfism. So because achondroplasia is the most common, it meant those were going to be the majority. But it was interesting to hear some of the experiences of people with proportionate dwarfism, who, people with disproportionate would say, I get more attention than them because I look like a dwarf. I look like one of the Oompa Loompas or one of the 7 dwarfs. They don't. So they weren't getting as much attention, negative social responses. So recruitment, my first form of recruitment, and one of the ones I was only going to use, was through being part of an association for people with dwarfism. Because I had dwarfism, it was easy to join. But I still explained why I wanted to be there. And so once I got permission, I went to these conventions for people with dwarfism. Now, one of the problems there is most of them are overtaken by average-sized parents who tell us what it's like to be a dwarf. And so the other part is there's different reasons for people going there. So a lot of people with dwarfism go there to try and find a partner. I was trying to find participants, whereas one man got the wrong end of the stick, let's say, and so he was more interested in dating me. And I said, well, no, that's not how it is, and whatever. And so after speaking to my supervisors, it was decided, because there was another guy with dwarfism who thought after I interviewed him it was a date. Well, that's a very boring date. Okay? And I'd already interviewed like about 20 women, so I don't know what I was, my identity was very constricted. But that's why, so my supervisor and I agreed, no more men. So it was just mostly female. So then I used social media because I wasn't going to go back to these conventions. So I joined several groups of people with dwarfism. They were also great because of logistical purposes. A lot of people with dwarfism cannot travel down to these conventions. No matter what people might say, people with dwarfism face many physical barriers in public transport. Okay, and then the snowballing, and then the other internet source was from a woman who does a blog on dwarfism, and that's why she was an email interview, because she didn't want to reveal her identity. This is really sticky. Okay, so I use photo elicitation, as I say. So it involves just simply inserting a map, a photograph, a cartoon, anything you want inside an interview. I use photos and I use maps. These help to draw on deeper data. They were really good for getting an in-depth view of everything. We really built on some of the things. So, as you can see here, I've got a picture, one of the pictures I've used. It's of a shopping mall, quite a modern looking shopping mall. So it's got a marble floor and it's quite busy. There's a mixture of people. There's some old people having a conversation. There's an early learning centre. There's an old man standing there. There's a couple with a pram. There's some fake trees and there's some benches. And basically what people say, this was really in depth. If I just asked them, how would you go around your, your usual mall? Oh, I'm working at 9 o'clock, only at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm working at 12. This was saying, well, that floor would be really difficult to walk on because of my spine. Those old people would probably turn around and look at me. I'd avoid the early learning centre because there's kids there. So I'd avoid it like the play because they'd probably come out and stare. And that's the kind of thing it's getting. Oh, that bench is handy. I can sit on that when my back's humbugging me. Then I showed them the maps because this was to get an idea of how they navigate through spaces. So they might say, well, I won't go through the high street, the main road, so I'd go to the back streets. Because if I walk through the high streets, people are going to stare, people are going to shout, people are going to ask me where my 6 friends are, so I'm not going to go through there. Oh, there's that nightclub there, no, I won't go there, but there's that nice cafe, I'll go there. And that's my local hairdressers, and that's accessible, whereas the other one isn't. So I was getting quite rich data from these maps, provoking memories and, reinforcing what had already been said. So when it came to spatial barriers, I was social model based, so I understood disability to be socially created. And like Imrie says, Robert Imrie, spaces are created for the average size, able-bodied person, and this is based on Le Corbusier's La Modula, as you can see here. So it's a 6-foot man, it's a drawing of a 6-foot man, I should say. He's got one arm up, and he doesn't look impaired, he's not sitting, he's got all his limbs, he's not got any impairment whatsoever. Now, when in disability, we always focus on the able-bodied. We never focus on the average stature, on the person who's not of average stature. So able-bodied, that's okay, that's disabled. Whereas if they're creating for the average-sized person, then surely people who are very small or very tall are disabled in those spaces. Because that's the whole reason we have anthropometrics. That's the whole reason everything is made to a certain measurement so that you don't feel uncomfortable, that you can reach it fine. Well, of course, that's very disabling for people with dwarfism. And it's from very mundane facilities, such as steps, door handles, and post boxes, to a myriad of other items, such as chairs and whatnot. So one of the problems is, as we get newer facilities, even though we have the Equality Act and Part M and all this disability legislation, to save money and to make more money, stores now are implementing self-service scanners, which you're all familiar with. Also in a petrol station, there'll be a part where you can pay at pump or pay at kiosk. These provide the average sized person with so many choices. Whereas for someone with dwarfism, it takes the one opportunity they have to pay for something. And you can't just dash off, So if you want to go to a petrol station, you're like, okay, no, I can't pay for petrol. I can't go, I've got to go and find a different petrol station. So it's very disabling. And if you've only got a couple of items of shopping, you've still got to queue up behind masses of trolleys because you can't use the one item for the self-service scanner. So a lot of this was avoidance and resistance. So if they knew a place had a more accessible space, like, the cafe down the road, that's got low counters, I'll go there. If they, if they can, then they would do things differently as well. But this obviously got a lot of unwanted attention. So if they had to bash the self-service scanner with their umbrella or purse, people will obviously look. And when you're someone with dwarfism, you're already getting stared at. So do you really want to go out and do something differently? And that was one of the problems. And then there was dependency. So a lot had to ask for help. But obviously, when you face a lot of social barriers, like people staring and photographing you, those are the last people you want to ask for help. So people are very choosy on who they ask. They sort of say, I won't ask teenagers, they'll have a good giggle with their friends. So I'll try and ask that person instead, or I will take my son with me. I'll go shopping with family or friends because they can do everything for me. And that was help. So, and it could affect the navigation, like say, if they were finding places more accessible. So it was really a thing where you've got to take the best of what you've been given. And this was because in disability access, now we think with accessible access, like the accessible toilet, all right, we've put a ramp in somewhere and we put an accessible toilet, so everything's brilliant now, everything's accessible. Well, of course, for people with dwarfism, that's not necessary. So I've got a diagram here showing the measurements, the anthropometric measurements that are used in planning and architecture, which shows the rough measurements of someone in a wheelchair and someone of average stature. Now, the wheelchair user is about 4'6" in height. That's the average stature. Well, remember, people with dwarfism are half a foot smaller. And then they have an average arm reach. So when you've got disproportionate dwarfism like me, you can barely reach the top of your head. So you can't stretch to reach something. You can't stretch to reach over a counter. So obviously something like the accessible toilet, you can either go to that where there's a high toilet and low sink, or you can use the regular toilet where there's a low toilet and high sink. So you're really stuck. Fine. And then there's child facilities. Now, these are quite new, but not enforced through law, and they can be either enabling or disabling. So if everything's lowered, it's great. But if you put something out of reach for a child because they're going to hurt themselves, it then puts people with dwarfism out of place. So they can't use that. They then find that very difficult to use, and it can lead to disableist infantilization because of the place is very childish, or because they're treated like a child because they can't access the same places. One of the things was, even when they could use a disabled facility, so here I'm showing the ISA, the International Symbol of Access, so it's the side profile of a diagram of a wheelchair user, and they'd get told off for using accessible spaces because they weren't in a wheelchair, they were walking there. So, like one of my participants explained, she got told off for using the accessible toilet by a wheelchair user because she shouldn't be using it, even though she explained, I can't reach the mirror, can't reach the sink, can't reach the lock, can't reach the coat hanger, but that symbol says it's for us. So they couldn't use the non-disabled places, but then socially they couldn't use the accessible spaces either. So last part I want to talk about is cultural reps. So as you can see, there's several representations here. There's dwarfs as leprechauns, dwarfs as Oompa Loompas, mini-me, pantomime actors. And then there's Warwick Davis, who promotes equality for people with dwarfism by standing on the shoulders of Ricky Gervais. Okay, and then he's in the panto as well, so he's promoting further equality there. So people with dwarfism have, for centuries, been seen as entertainers. We've been kept as pets by royalty. We've been traded as gifts. We've been freaks. We are figures of fun. You can hire us out for your stag do. You can hire us out for anything you want. You can hire us out for a bit of dwarf throwing, which is from the Wolf of Wall Street there. So this has got to have an impact. When dwarfism is so rare, your perceptions are shaped by these cultural reps. So, like Anne says here, and I'll just read out, that thing that gets me is that some small people, like that guy in Austin Powers, I'd like to beat that guy up because he can get shitloads of money for it, but we have to deal with the shit that comes from it. So when you've got 5 people with dwarfism, for example, doing this stuff, but then 10 get affected, is that ethically right? Nobody seems to care about that. They all say, oh, it's a job for those dwarfs. Oh, they enjoy it. Well, we don't. We don't enjoy getting the stick that comes from it. We don't enjoy going for a job interview to be told, no, sorry, love, we're not running a circus here, which happened to a lawyer in Harvard. So, you know, we're getting down that. When we go down the street, it's like, where's your 6 little friends? You get photographed if you're near a pantomime poster. So people avoid pantomimes. People avoid the cinema if a new film comes out, such as The Greatest Showman, where we celebrate a man who kept freaks. Okay? But it really has this negative effect on people with dwarfism. So just to finish, people with dwarfism experience the built environment very differently, and this is down to both social and spatial barriers. It's not just down to, you know, the physical barriers that we'd consider. It is because of cultural representations, because people treat people with dwarfism differently. They think it's all right to stare, photograph, and ask all sorts of jokes because we enjoy jokes, apparently. Disabled spaces and facilities do not necessarily provide access, so we need to expand on that. So basically, some of the recommendations is we need to provide more accessible spaces for a range of people, not just a really narrow specific area of impairments. So by using universal design, we can do that. We need to engage with how the media culturally presents disabled people, in particular with dwarfism, and how we can challenge that through more positive representations, such as like Peter Dinklage in Game of Thrones, that kind of thing. And we need a wider acceptance of disability in society and social implications. So thank you.